What's up everyone, we're back at it again. My name is Brad and welcome back to my channel. You're probably overwatering your ZZ plant, which is slowly killing it, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm also going to give you some helpful bonus tips that will help you get an awesome ZZ plant. Let's get into it. I would say that overwatering the ZZ plant is probably the #1 reason why your ZZ plant isn't looking the best that it can look. A lot of times we get into this habit of treating all of our tropical houseplants the same. But with the ZZ plant, due to the makeup of the plant itself, it really needs to dry out way more substantially than other tropical houseplants such as a pothos or a Monstera deliciosa. Let's switch the camera angle so we can really get a closer look at what the ZZ plant makeup looks like, so you can see how overwatering is an easy trap to get into. The ZZ plant has these beautiful, thick stems that spring from rhizomes that are buried underneath the soil. These rhizomes are water storing. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can pull out one of these rhizomes. So I'm not going to pull it completely out, but here's an idea, or this should give you an idea of what a rhizome looks like. As you can see, this rhizome is, actually, let's just go ahead and pull it out a little bit further. So this rhizome, you can see a nice healthy root come out, but this rhizome is actually storing water, a ton of water. This is where your ZZ plant is growing stems from. So I can see that I have a nice new healthy stem that's springing up. This particular stem I cut off, but the rhizome is really what we're focusing on here. You want to make sure that this rhizome does not get overly wet, because what will ultimately happen is your rhizome will become mushy and then your plant will deteriorate and eventually die. So also keeping in mind that this rhizome is storing water, it means that you really don't need to water your ZZ plant as frequently as you would other plants such as your Philodendron Brazil, your pothos, your monsteras, your Palea, really any other tropical house plant. The ZZ plant is unique in that nature. So back off when you're watering in order to protect this rhizome. I could really go maybe a month, 2 months without even watering the ZZ plant and it'll be okay. But because it's outside, the ZZ plant, this ZZ plant is subjected to the elements. So when it rains, it gets watered. When it doesn't rain, it doesn't get watered. And I also just want to call out too that even though the ZZ plant is outside, look at the leaves. And we'll get into that once we talk about the care routines for the ZZ plant. If you like this video and want to see more videos like it about houseplant tips and tricks, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. It's totally free and would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to taking care of the ZZ plant. So then the next obvious logical question to ask is, if my plant is getting its water from the rhizomes, well, how do I know when to water? Well, there are 2 things that you need to do. The first is you can look at the leaves. If you notice that your leaves are becoming a little bit wrinkly, well, that's a sign that the plant is no longer getting water from the rhizomes and that your rhizomes are essentially thirsty. You need to water your plant so those rhizomes can begin to store up more water and then ultimately feed those leaves and prevent the wrinkliness of your leaves. The second thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to trust your instinct. Your ZZ plant is a great plant to start off with when trying to figure out what your instincts are telling you. Because this plant can go months, literal months, without being watered, your instincts will help inform you whether or not, or you can think of it as using your instincts as a trial and error period to see how good your instincts are. If your instincts are good enough, well, your ZZ plant will survive. If your instincts aren't that good, well, your ZZ plant is still going to survive as long as you check on things like the leaves to see whether or not they are becoming wrinkly, for instance. Now that we have talked about the watering, let's get into some other care aspects of the ZZ plant so we can help get you an awesome ZZ plant as well. Let's talk about the biggest myth that exists when it comes to the unkillable ZZ plant, and that is whether or not these like being in low light, whether or not they can survive in low light, whether or not they can thrive in low light. Well, ZZ plants, they can survive in lower light conditions, but they will not thrive. This ZZ plant, I keep it outside during the growing season. We're outside, we get beautiful sun outside during the growing season, and it absolutely loves it. it is springing up leaves from the rhizome, or it's springing up stalks actually from the rhizome pretty regularly. And you can see the newer leaves from the older leaves just based on how green they are. So for instance, this is an older stalk, here's a newer leaf stalk, and the plant is just continuing to get more and more full. Now, there is this myth, which there is some merit to, that your ZZ plants can tolerate lower light conditions. Well, the myth is actually they can survive lower light conditions. They will not survive. They will tolerate, they will survive, but they will not thrive. So you'll be able to keep your ZZ plant in a lower light, no light condition for potentially a year. You most likely won't get any kind of new growth, but your plant will maintain. If you want to get a bigger, bushier, more robust ZZ plant, you need to up the lighting conditions as much as possible. These plants can tolerate direct sunlight, as is evident by the fact that I do keep this plant outside and it is getting direct sunlight. It could also tolerate indirect sunlight, bright indirect sunlight, as well as medium light. The more light you give it, similar to other tropical houseplants, the better refined the growth will be. You'll notice that the stalks here that are extending from the rhizomes have a very short internodal length, which is causing the ZZ plant to have this just beautiful growth. The lower the lighting conditions that your ZZ plant is given, though, the wider or the longer the internodal length will be, and it'll essentially result in a plant that looks a little on the leggy side. So yes, when it comes to watering, you want to, or when it comes to lighting, you do want to make sure that you give your ZZ plant as much light as possible. When it comes to fertilizing, a well-balanced 1:1:1 NPK ratio liquid fertilizer, even a granular fertilizer, is the way to go with your ZZ plant. It's not really important to fertilize more than once or twice a season, and that is because of the fact that your rhizomes are storing a lot of that water in them. So that water is a nutrient store, and if that water is rich in fertilizer, well, your ZZ plant is going to grow nice, big, and beautiful. If you fertilize every watering or every other watering or even every month when it comes to your ZZ plant, you really aren't doing anything. It's not doing more harm than good or more good than bad. It really is doing nothing, because your rhizomes, once they are full of water, they most likely aren't going to uptake any additional water. Worst case scenario, though, is when you water too frequently, let's say once every week or so, those rhizomes are going to get mushy and your plant is going to die. So yes, when it comes to fertilizer, use a 1:1:1 well-balanced liquid or granular fertilizer when watering these plants. If you're using a liquid fertilizer, it's not important to fertilize more than once or twice in a given growing season. Soil is also very important when it comes to caring for your ZZ plant, and again, it all comes down to the rhizome. You want to protect that rhizome as much as possible. Giving your plant a nice, thick, chunky soil is really good, because that water is just going to drain right through, and your rhizome will not sit in water for too long. If the rhizome does sit in water too long, again, it will get mushy, it will deteriorate, and it will start really to impact your plant negatively. Having a nice soil that's chunky and that is able to allow water to flow easily is really key to making sure that your ZZ plant has a really nice, great life. And on the topic of soil, let's also talk about the kind of pot that I like to keep my ZZ plants in. My ZZ plant is in a terracotta pot, and the reason why I like to do it in a terracotta pot is because it allows for that oxygen exchange. Oxygen can go in, oxygen can go out, and it allows for more breathability. So let's say you're someone who tends to overwater. Well, a terracotta pot is really great because due to that oxygen exchange, that water is going to, or your soil really is going to dry out more frequently than it would than if it were in a ceramic pot or a plastic pot or even a nursery pot. So putting your ZZ plant in a terracotta pot is really nice. And personally, I like the way that ZZ looks when it's in a terracotta pot. So that's another tip for you as well. So we covered a couple of things today. We covered really why you should, in a sense, stop watering your ZZ plant as much as you may be watering your ZZ plant, because it will negatively impact your plant. We also covered things about, well, the rhizome and how it stores water, and that water store is really what's feeding your plant. And because of the rhizome, it means that you don't have to water your plant as frequently as you would other non-succulent tropical houseplants. Then we talked about the light in the soil. This ZZ plant loves light. Yes, rumors are true that it can survive in lower light conditions, but if you want to give it an optimal environment, you want to try to give it as much light as possible. This ZZ plant is grown outdoors, direct sunlight. And then finally, for the soil, you want to make sure that you give it a nice chunky soil that will allow for the water to easily drain through. It's all about protecting that rhizome. Water that is able to easily drain through the soil won't sit on the rhizome or around the rhizome, which will prevent the chance or reduce the chance of the rhizome rotting. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Again, my name is Brad. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.